Maybe success just skips a generation, Dad said, moments before Harvard named a building after me. My name is Elena Mitchell, and I'm 34 years old. 3 months ago, I stood in Harvard's Grand Alumni Hall listening to my father's voice echo through my childhood memories. Maybe success just skips a generation. He'd said those words with such casual cruelty when I was 22, fresh out of my master's program in biochemical engineering, desperately seeking his approval after years of academic excellence that he somehow never seemed to notice. What he didn't know that day was that his dismissive comment would become the fuel for a journey that would culminate in Harvard University, naming their newest research building after me. If you've ever been told you're not good enough by the very people who should believe in you most, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you've ever had to prove your worth to family members who refuse to see your potential, and subscribe for more stories about turning family rejection into unprecedented success. Growing up in the Mitchell household meant living in the shadow of expectations that were never quite meant for me. My father, Dr. Michael Mitchell, was a prominent cardiologist who had built his reputation through methodical precision and unwavering confidence in his own judgment. My mother, Patricia, was a former nurse who had sacrificed her career to support his ascension in the medical world. Their dream was simple: raise children who would surpass their achievements and bring honor to the Mitchell family name. The problem was they had very specific ideas about what success looked like, and somehow I never fit that mold. My younger brother David was everything my parents had envisioned in a child: charismatic, naturally gifted in mathematics, and possessing the kind of effortless charm that made professors and peers alike gravitate toward him. When David announced his intention to pursue medical school to follow in Dad's footsteps, the celebration dinner lasted 3 hours. When I told them I'd been accepted into MIT's biochemical engineering program with a full research scholarship, Dad nodded politely and asked if I'd remembered to pick up his dry cleaning. The contrast wasn't subtle, and it cut deeper each time I achieved something that should have made them proud, but somehow left me feeling more invisible than before. I still remember the Thanksgiving dinner when I was 19, home from my undergraduate studies at Stanford, where I was double majoring in chemistry and biomedical engineering while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. The extended family had gathered, aunts and uncles eager to hear about their nieces' and nephews' accomplishments. Uncle James asked about my studies, and I excitedly began explaining my research project on developing biodegradable drug delivery systems. Halfway through my explanation, my father interrupted with a dismissive wave. "Elena's always been interested in these theoretical projects," he said, his tone suggesting my work was merely an elaborate hobby. "David, on the other hand, is taking the MCAT next year. Pre-med at Harvard, you know. Now that's what I call practical ambition." The room's attention immediately shifted to David, who basked in the admiration while I sat there, my words hanging unfinished in the air, feeling like I'd been erased from my own story. The pattern had been established early in our childhood. When I won the state science fair at age 12 with my project on enzyme catalysis, my parents attended David's Little League game instead. When I was accepted into the National Honor Society, they were helping David with his college applications, even though he was still a sophomore. Every achievement of mine was overshadowed by David's potential. Every accolade I earned was met with lukewarm acknowledgement, while his slightest accomplishments were celebrated as if he'd cured cancer. The golden child syndrome was so deeply ingrained in our family dynamics that I began to question my own worth, wondering if perhaps they were right to invest their emotional energy in David instead of me. The most painful part wasn't just the favoritism, it was the casual way they dismissed my intelligence. My father would introduce David to his colleagues as my son, the future doctor, while I was simply, "Elena, she's studying something scientific." When I graduated summa cum laude from Stanford with dual degrees, they attended the ceremony but spent the reception talking to other parents about David's MCAT prep courses. When I was accepted into MIT's graduate program with full funding and a research assistantship, my mother's only comment was whether I thought the weather in Boston would affect my complexion. The message was clear. My achievements were background noise to David's symphony of success. By the time I finished my master's degree at MIT, specializing in biomedical engineering with a focus on drug delivery systems, I had published 3 papers in peer-reviewed journals and held 2 provisional patents. My thesis advisor, Dr. Sarah Williams, called my work groundbreaking and suggested I consider pursuing a PhD at Harvard under her former colleague. But when I shared this news with my family, The response was predictably underwhelming. "That's nice, dear," my mother said, not looking up from her magazine. "David just got accepted into Johns Hopkins Medical School. We're so proud." The conversation that followed centered entirely on David's future as a surgeon, his prestigious acceptance, and the family legacy he would continue. My potential Harvard opportunity was forgotten before dessert was served. The breaking point came during that family dinner in May, just days before I was scheduled to interview for the Harvard PhD program. I had spent weeks preparing, researching the laboratory I hoped to join, and studying the groundbreaking work being done in nanotechnology drug delivery. The interview represented everything I had worked toward, the culmination of years of academic excellence and research dedication. As I tried to share my excitement about the opportunity, explaining how my research could potentially revolutionize cancer treatment, my father set down his fork and looked at me with that expression I knew too well, the one that said I was about to be put in my place. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making pronouncements about life and death. "You need to be realistic about your future. This research path you're on, it's all very theoretical, very impractical. Maybe success just skips a generation." The words hung in the air like poison. David is following a proven path, helping people directly, making a real difference. You're chasing academic fantasies that will never amount to anything meaningful. Perhaps it's time to consider a more practical career, maybe teaching high school science or working in a hospital lab. Leave the real innovation to people better suited for it. The silence that followed was deafening. Even David looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat as our parents nodded in agreement with Dad's brutal assessment. In that moment, something crystallized within me. The hurt I'd carried for years transformed into something harder, more determined. I looked around the table at the faces of my family, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. They had never believed in me, never saw my potential, never recognized that while they were celebrating David's promise, I was already delivering results. That night, I made a silent vow. I would prove them wrong so thoroughly, so completely, that they would never again question whether success had skipped their generation. I would show them what real achievement looked like, and when I did, they would finally understand the magnitude of their mistake. The Harvard interview took place on a crisp October morning in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I had arrived the night before, staying in a modest hotel near campus, my stomach churning with a mixture of anticipation and the lingering sting of my father's words. "Maybe success just skips a generation," played on repeat in my mind as I walked through Harvard Yard, the autumn leaves crunching beneath my feet. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was interviewing at the very institution where my brother had been accepted for medical school, the same place my father held in such reverence when discussing David's future. Dr. Jennifer Harrison, the principal investigator of the Biomedical Nanotechnology Laboratory, was everything I had hoped for in a mentor. Brilliant, direct, and completely unimpressed by pedigree or family connections, she cared only about the quality of research and the potential for groundbreaking discoveries. During our 3-hour interview, we discussed my previous work on biodegradable drug delivery systems, my innovative approach to targeting cancer cells while minimizing damage to healthy tissue, and my vision for the future of personalized medicine. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen and valued for my intellectual capabilities. "Your work at MIT was exceptional," Dr. Harrison said, reviewing my portfolio of published papers and patent applications. "But I'm particularly intrigued by your theoretical framework for multi-stage drug release systems. This could revolutionize how we approach chemotherapy treatment." She leaned forward, her eyes intense with scientific curiosity. "If we could perfect this technology, we could potentially eliminate many of the devastating side effects of cancer treatment while dramatically improving patient outcomes. Are you prepared for the level of commitment this research would require?" I didn't hesitate. "Dr. Harrison, this research isn't just my career goal, it's my calling. I've watched too many families struggle with the brutal effects of traditional chemotherapy. If there's even a chance that my work could ease that suffering while improving survival rates, I'm willing to dedicate everything I have to making it happen." The conviction in my voice surprised even me, but I realized that years of being dismissed had only strengthened my resolve to make a meaningful impact on the world. The call came 3 days later. I was accepted into Harvard's PhD program with full funding, a research assistantship in Dr. Harrison's lab, and access to state-of-the-art facilities that most graduate students could only dream of. My hands trembled as I held the phone, Dr. Harrison's words echoing in my mind. "Elena, we believe you have the potential to change the face of cancer treatment. We're honored to support your research journey." I drove home to Connecticut that weekend, the acceptance letter carefully tucked in my purse, my heart pounding with excitement to share the news with my family. Surely this achievement would finally earn their recognition, their pride, their acknowledgement that I was capable of extraordinary things. Harvard PhD acceptance wasn't something that could be dismissed as theoretical or impractical. This was concrete validation from one of the world's most prestigious institutions. The scene when I arrived home was achingly familiar. David was visiting for the weekend, and my parents were fussing over him as he described his first months at Johns Hopkins Medical School. The dining room table was covered with his textbooks, and my mother was hanging on his every word as he explained the intricacies of human anatomy. My father beamed with pride as David recounted compliments from his professors and his plans for surgical rotations. "I have some news to share," I announced during a brief pause in David's monologue. I pulled out the Harvard acceptance letter, my hands slightly shaking with nervous excitement. "I've been accepted into Harvard's PhD program in biomedical engineering. Full funding, research assistantship, everything." The reaction was not what I had hoped for. My mother glanced up briefly from David's textbooks. "That's nice, dear. How long will that take?" When I explained that a PhD typically required 4 to 6 years, she frowned. "Oh my, that's quite a long time to still be in school. Don't you think you should be starting your career by now?" My father's response was even more crushing. "Elena, I'm concerned about this path you're choosing. You're already 22, and you're talking about spending another 6 years in school while David will be out practicing medicine and making a real difference in people's lives. This obsession with research and theoretical work, it's not sustainable. Most PhD programs have extremely high dropout rates, and even if you finish, academic jobs are nearly impossible to find. You're setting yourself up for disappointment." "But Dad," I protested, my voice growing stronger despite my hurt, "this is Harvard. This is one of the most competitive programs in the country. Dr. Harrison believes my research could revolutionize cancer treatment. We're talking about potentially saving thousands of lives." David, perhaps sensing the tension, tried to interject. "That sounds really cool, Elena. What kind of cancer research?" But before I could answer, my father continued his devastating assessment. "Elena, you need to understand something about the real world. Medical research is incredibly competitive, and frankly, it requires a level of brilliance and dedication that very few people possess. The people who succeed in that field are exceptional in ways that most of us simply aren't. David has the natural gifts and practical mindset to excel in medicine. You've always been a good student, but good isn't enough for the kind of career you're imagining." The words hit me like physical blows. I looked at my mother, hoping for some support, some recognition of my achievement, but she was already turning her attention back to David's anatomy textbook. "Maybe you could be a lab technician or research assistant," she suggested absently. "That would still be working in science, but more realistic for your abilities." I felt the familiar sting of tears threatening, but something else rose within me. A cold, determined anger that I had never experienced before. These people had systematically undermined my confidence for years, dismissing every achievement, every recognition, every sign that I might be capable of extraordinary things. But Harvard University's admissions committee, comprised of some of the most brilliant minds in science, had seen something in me that my own family refused to acknowledge. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom surrounded by dusty science fair trophies and academic awards that my parents had never properly celebrated, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my life. I wouldn't just pursue this PhD. I would excel beyond anything they could imagine. I would conduct research so groundbreaking, so revolutionary, that it would be impossible for them to dismiss. I would force them to confront their fundamental misunderstanding of who I was and what I was capable of achieving. The next morning, I called Dr. Harrison to accept the position formally. As I spoke with her about research timelines and laboratory procedures, I felt a sense of purpose crystallizing within me. My family's lack of faith in my abilities wasn't a limitation. It was fuel. Every dismissive comment, every backhanded compliment, every moment they had chosen to invest their pride in David instead of me would drive me to work harder, think more creatively, and push further than I had ever imagined possible. I moved to Cambridge that December, immersing myself completely in the world of biomedical research. The long hours in the laboratory, the intense focus required for groundbreaking research, the pressure of working at one of the world's most demanding institutions, none of it felt like sacrifice. It felt like coming home to a place where my abilities were not only recognized, but celebrated and nurtured. Have you ever found that the people who doubted you most became your greatest source of motivation? Sometimes the harshest criticism comes from those who should be our biggest supporters, but it can become the very thing that propels us to extraordinary achievement. My first year at Harvard was a revelation. Dr. Harrison's laboratory was a universe away from the dismissive environment of my childhood home. Here, intellectual curiosity was currency, innovative thinking was celebrated, and my contributions were not only valued, but essential to the team's success. The research we were conducting on targeted drug delivery systems represented the cutting edge of cancer treatment, and I found myself at the center of discoveries that could potentially save millions of lives. The work was demanding in ways I had never experienced. 18-hour days in the laboratory became routine as I developed and tested new formulations of biodegradable nanoparticles designed to deliver chemotherapy drugs directly to cancer cells, while leaving healthy tissue untouched. The technical challenges were immense. We needed particles small enough to navigate the bloodstream, smart enough to recognize cancer cells, and sophisticated enough to release their payload at precisely the right moment and concentration. Dr. Harrison quickly recognized my aptitude for solving complex problems. "Elena," she said during one of our weekly progress meetings, "your approach to multi-stage drug release is unlike anything I've seen in 20 years of research. You're not just following established protocols, you're reinventing the fundamental science." Her praise meant more to me than any recognition I had ever received, because it was based purely on the quality of my work, not on family connections or social expectations. By my second year, I had already published 4 papers as lead author in top-tier scientific journals. My research on programmable nanoparticles that could deliver multiple drugs in sequence was generating significant attention in the scientific community. Conference invitations began arriving from around the world, and I found myself presenting my work to audiences of the most brilliant researchers in the field. Each presentation, each published paper, each recognition from my peers was a small victory against the voice in my head that still echoed my father's words about success skipping generations. The breakthrough came during my 3rd year, almost by accident as many scientific discoveries do. I was working late one evening in the laboratory, frustrated by the inconsistent results from our latest batch of nanoparticles. The drug release timing was erratic, sometimes too fast, sometimes too slow, never quite achieving the precise control we needed for optimal therapeutic effect. In my exhaustion, I accidentally mixed 2 different polymer formulations that I had been testing separately. The next morning, when I analyzed the results of that accidental combination, I discovered something extraordinary. The hybrid nanoparticles exhibited a level of precision and control that exceeded our most optimistic projections. They could deliver multiple drugs in perfect sequence, responding to specific biological markers in the cancer cells, adjusting their release patterns based on the tumor's response to treatment. It was like creating a smart bomb that could distinguish between friend and enemy with unprecedented accuracy. Dr. Harrison was speechless when I showed her the data. "Elena, do you understand what you've accomplished here? This isn't just an incremental improvement. This is a paradigm shift. This technology could make traditional chemotherapy obsolete." The excitement in her voice was infectious, but I felt something else, a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with scientific achievement and everything to do with proving my family wrong. The patent application process began immediately, with Harvard's Technology Transfer Office recognizing the commercial potential of my discovery. Within months, 3 major pharmaceutical companies were bidding for licensing rights, offering sums that made my head spin. But more importantly, the National Cancer Institute took notice, awarding our laboratory a $15 million research grant to develop the technology for clinical trials. As news of my research breakthrough spread through the scientific community, the recognition came swiftly and from the highest levels. The American Association for Cancer Research selected me as their youngest ever recipient of the Outstanding Young Investigator Award. Nature magazine featured my work on their cover, calling it a potential game changer in the fight against cancer. The MacArthur Foundation reached out about their Genius Grant program, suggesting that my research represented the kind of revolutionary thinking they sought to support. Each accolade, each recognition, each sign that the scientific world viewed my work as extraordinary only deepened my commitment to proving my family's assessment wrong. I wasn't just succeeding. I was excelling at a level that even Harvard's most optimistic professors hadn't anticipated. The theoretical work my father had dismissed as impractical was being hailed as potentially life-saving innovation by experts around the world. During my 4th year, Dr. Harrison approached me with an opportunity that would have seemed impossible when I first arrived at Harvard. Elena, I've been asked to recommend someone for a joint appointment with the medical school. They want to fast-track the clinical trials for your nanoparticle technology, and they need someone who understands both the engineering and the medical applications. The position comes with your own laboratory, a significant research budget, and the opportunity to see your work directly impact patient care. The offer was extraordinary, a tenure-track position at Harvard at age 26, with resources to continue developing technology that could revolutionize cancer treatment. But what struck me most was the recognition implicit in the offer. Harvard University, one of the world's most prestigious institutions, was betting their reputation on my ability to transform medical care. The girl my family had written off as academically gifted but ultimately impractical was being offered the chance to lead groundbreaking medical research at their institution. I accepted the position, and with it came responsibilities that would have terrified my younger self. Managing a research team, securing funding for multi-million-dollar studies, collaborating with oncologists to design clinical trials. Each aspect of the role required skills and knowledge that extended far beyond the laboratory bench. But I discovered that years of working without family support had developed resilience and self-reliance that served me well in leadership roles. The clinical trials began in my 5th year, with early-stage cancer patients volunteering to test my nanoparticle delivery system. The results exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Patients experienced dramatically reduced side effects while showing improved response rates compared to traditional chemotherapy. The technology wasn't just working, it was revolutionizing how doctors could approach cancer treatment. As word of the clinical trial success spread, my world expanded beyond the confines of academic research. Pharmaceutical companies competed to license the technology, medical conferences invited me as a keynote speaker, and patient advocacy groups recognized me as a pioneer in developing more humane cancer treatments. The theoretical work my father had dismissed was directly improving the lives of real people facing life-threatening illness. But perhaps the most significant recognition came from an unexpected source. The World Health Organization invited me to join their advisory committee on emerging cancer treatments, recognizing my nanoparticle technology as one of the most promising developments in decades. At 28, I was the youngest scientist ever appointed to this prestigious committee, working alongside Nobel laureates and medical pioneers whose research had shaped modern healthcare. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my family continued to celebrate David's progress through medical school and residency, I was already working at the highest levels of medical innovation, developing treatments that would impact cancer care globally. The success they had assumed would skip our generation was happening right under their noses, but they were too focused on conventional markers of achievement to recognize it. By my 6th year at Harvard, the whispers had begun, not just in scientific circles, but in the broader academic community where rumors of extraordinary achievements travel fast. My nanoparticle technology had successfully completed Phase 2 clinical trials, with results so promising that the FDA fast-tracked approval for Phase 3 studies. The medical community was calling it the most significant breakthrough in cancer treatment in decades, and my name was becoming synonymous with revolutionary medical innovation. But the recognition that would change everything came through a phone call on a rainy Thursday morning in October. Dr. Patricia Caldwell, Harvard's vice president for research, asked me to meet with her urgently. As I walked across campus to her office, I couldn't shake the feeling that something momentous was about to happen. The trees were dressed in their autumn glory, the same colors I had admired during my first interview 6 years earlier, but now I walked these paths as an established researcher whose work was changing the world. Elena, Dr. Caldwell began, her voice carrying an excitement she was trying to contain. I have news that I believe will be of significant interest to you. The university has made a decision that reflects not only your extraordinary contributions to medical research, but also your potential to continue leading groundbreaking discoveries for decades to come. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. The Board of Trustees has voted unanimously to name our new biomedical research facility after you. The Elena Mitchell Center for Advanced Drug Delivery will be a $200 million state-of-the-art facility that will house the most sophisticated research laboratories in the world. It will be a testament to your achievements and a platform for future discoveries that we believe will continue to transform medical care. The room seemed to spin around me. I had achieved recognition beyond my wildest dreams, but what struck me most profoundly was the symbolism of the moment. Harvard University, the institution my father held in such reverence when discussing David's education, was naming a building after me. Not just any building, but a research center that would advance the very work my family had dismissed as impractical and theoretical. The dedication ceremony is scheduled for next month, Dr. Caldwell continued. We typically invite family members of our honorees to attend. I imagine your parents will be incredibly proud to see their daughter recognized in this way. Family pride. The concept seemed almost foreign after years of pursuing excellence without their support or recognition. But suddenly, I realized that this moment represented more than professional achievement. It was the opportunity to finally show my family exactly how wrong they had been about my potential. That evening, I sat in my apartment overlooking the Charles River, staring at the formal invitation to the dedication ceremony. The embossed Harvard seal gleamed in the lamplight, and below it, in elegant script, were the words that would forever change how my family understood my place in the world. The university cordially invites you to the dedication of the Elena Mitchell Center for Advanced Drug Delivery. For the first time in years, I called my parents. The conversation was predictably awkward, filled with the usual polite inquiries about my research work and updates about David's surgical residency. They mentioned that he was doing exceptionally well, receiving praise from his attending physicians and being considered for competitive fellowship programs. I listened patiently, waiting for the right moment to share my own news. I have something to tell you, I said finally, my voice steady despite the racing of my heart. Harvard is naming their new biomedical research center after me. There's going to be a dedication ceremony next month, and I'd like you to attend. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that I wondered if the call had been disconnected. Finally, my mother's voice came through, uncertain and confused. I'm sorry, Elena, could you repeat that? Did you say they're naming something after you? I explained the situation again, providing details about the $200 million facility, the significance of the honor, and the ceremony planned for November. I could hear my parents exchanging whispered conversations in the background, their voices carrying notes of disbelief and something that might have been embarrassment. Well, my father said finally, his voice lacking its usual authority, that's quite an honor. We'll certainly plan to attend. But I could hear the questions in his tone, the struggle to reconcile this news with his long-held beliefs about my capabilities and potential. The weeks leading up to the ceremony passed in a blur of media interviews and preparation. The story of Harvard naming a building after a 29-year-old scientist captured national attention, with features in major newspapers and appearances on scientific programming. Each interview was an opportunity to discuss not only my research, but also the journey that had brought me to this moment. During one particularly meaningful interview with Scientific American, the journalist asked about my motivation for pursuing such demanding research. Without mentioning my family directly, I talked about the power of being underestimated, how doubt from others can become fuel for extraordinary achievement. Sometimes the people who believe in you least can become your greatest source of motivation, I said, the words carrying years of accumulated determination. 3 days before the ceremony, David called me for the first time in months. The conversation was stilted and strange, filled with congratulations that seemed to come from a place of genuine confusion rather than sibling pride. Elena, I had no idea your research was so significant, he admitted. I mean, I knew you were working on cancer stuff, but Harvard naming a building after you, that's incredible. His words revealed something I had long suspected. My family's dismissal of my work wasn't necessarily malicious, but rather born from genuine inability to understand the significance of what I was accomplishing. They had been so focused on traditional markers of medical success that they had completely missed the revolutionary nature of my contributions to the field. The night before the ceremony, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Harrison knocked on my office door around 9 p.m., carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing an expression of mixed pride and emotion. "I wanted to speak with you privately before tomorrow's circus," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Elena, in my 25 years at Harvard, I have never seen a scientist achieve what you have accomplished in such a short time. But more than that, I have never worked with someone who maintained such grace and determination in the face of the challenges you've overcome." She paused, her eyes growing misty. "I don't know the details of your family situation, but I've observed enough to understand that your support system hasn't always recognized your extraordinary gifts. Tomorrow, when Harvard officially honors you, I want you to remember something. This recognition isn't just about your scientific achievements. It's about your character, your persistence, and your refusal to let anyone else's limitations define your potential." As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 years earlier, I had arrived at Harvard carrying the weight of my family's doubt and my father's crushing assessment that success might skip our generation. Tomorrow, I would stand before the scientific community as they dedicated a research center in my honor, validation that the success they had failed to see in me was not only real, but extraordinary. The irony was perfect. My father would attend the ceremony at Harvard, the very institution he revered, to watch his daughter receive an honor that surpassed anything he had ever achieved in his own medical career. The theoretical work he had dismissed would be celebrated as life-saving innovation, and the daughter he had underestimated would be recognized as a leader in transforming medical care. The morning of the dedication ceremony dawned crisp and clear, the kind of November day that makes Harvard's campus look like a postcard. As I walked through Harvard Yard toward the ceremony venue, I could see the elegant banners announcing the Elena Mitchell Center for Advanced Drug Delivery hanging from the historic brick buildings. Each banner felt like a small victory, a public declaration that my work had earned recognition at the highest levels of academic achievement. The ceremony was being held in Harvard's Memorial Hall, a magnificent Victorian Gothic building that had hosted some of the most significant moments in the university's history. As I approached the building, I could see the crowd gathering: distinguished faculty, prominent researchers from around the world, representatives from pharmaceutical companies, and government officials who had supported my research funding. The sight was both exhilarating and surreal. I spotted my family immediately as they approached the entrance. My parents looked uncomfortable and overwhelmed, clearly out of their element among the Harvard community. My mother wore her best dress, the navy blue one she reserved for the most important occasions, while my father had chosen his most formal suit. David was with them, looking around with the wide-eyed expression of someone trying to absorb the magnitude of what was happening. The moment I had been anticipating for years was finally at hand, but as I watched my family navigate the crowd of Nobel laureates and medical pioneers, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, but a complex mixture of sadness and resolve. These were the people who should have been my earliest supporters, my most enthusiastic cheerleaders, but instead, they were attending my moment of greatest professional recognition as strangers trying to understand who their daughter had become. Dr. Caldwell spotted me and approached with the university's president, Dr. Michael Harrison, a distinguished man whose presence commanded immediate respect. "Elena," she said warmly, "are you ready for your moment of recognition? This ceremony will be one of Harvard's most significant dedications in decades." As we entered Memorial Hall, I was struck by the grandeur of the setting. The soaring Gothic windows cast colored light across the assembled crowd, and the university's most prestigious banners hung from the rafters. A podium had been established at the front of the hall, flanked by large photographs of the planned research center and displays highlighting my work on targeted cancer therapy. My family found seats in the reserved section, looking increasingly overwhelmed as they realized the caliber of attendees surrounding them. I watched my father's expression as he took in the scene. Nobel Prize winners chatting casually with pharmaceutical executives, government officials discussing research funding, medical school deans greeting each other like old friends. This was a world he had aspired to join but never quite reached, and now his daughter was at its center. The ceremony began with Dr. Harrison's opening remarks about Harvard's commitment to groundbreaking research and the university's pride in supporting scientists who transform human knowledge. He spoke about the rare individuals whose work transcends academic achievement to create real impact in the world, building anticipation for the moment when my specific contributions would be highlighted. Today, Dr. Harrison announced, his voice carrying clearly through the packed hall, we gather to honor a scientist whose work represents the very best of Harvard's research mission. Dr. Elena Mitchell's revolutionary approach to targeted drug delivery has opened new possibilities for cancer treatment that were unimaginable just a decade ago. As he continued his introduction, I could see my parents leaning forward in their seats, finally beginning to understand the significance of what was happening. The detailed description of my research achievements, the explanation of how my nanoparticle technology was revolutionizing cancer care, the statistics about lives that could be saved, all of it was painting a picture of accomplishment that exceeded anything they had imagined possible. Dr. Sarah Williams, my former MIT advisor who had encouraged me to pursue the Harvard opportunity, stepped to the podium to deliver the main introduction. Her words carried the weight of someone who had watched my entire journey from promising graduate student to world-renowned researcher. I have had the privilege of knowing Elena Mitchell since she was a graduate student with extraordinary potential, Dr. Williams began. What I could not have predicted was the speed and magnitude with which she would fulfill that potential. In less than 7 years, she has conducted research that will fundamentally change how we approach cancer treatment, saved countless lives through her innovative technology, and earned recognition as one of the most promising medical researchers of her generation. She paused, letting her words resonate through the hall. But perhaps most remarkably, Elena has accomplished all of this while maintaining the intellectual humility and collaborative spirit that mark the very best scientists. She understands that groundbreaking research is not about personal glory, but about advancing human knowledge and alleviating suffering. As Dr. Williams detailed my specific achievements, the publications, the patents, the clinical trial successes, the awards from prestigious scientific organizations, I watched my family's reactions with fascination. My mother's hand had moved to her throat in a gesture of surprise I recognized from childhood. My father's usual confident posture had given way to something approaching stunned attention. David was staring at me as if seeing a stranger. The moment came when Dr. Williams introduced me to deliver my acceptance remarks. As I walked to the podium, the applause was thunderous, a standing ovation from some of the most brilliant minds in science. I looked out at the crowd, my eyes finding my family in their seats. For the first time in my life, I saw something in my father's expression that I had never seen before. Unmistakable pride mixed with what appeared to be shock at his fundamental misunderstanding of who his daughter had become. "Thank you," I began, waiting for the applause to subside. 7 years ago, when I first arrived at Harvard, someone important to me suggested that perhaps success might skip our generation. Today, as Harvard honors me with this extraordinary recognition, I want to talk about what success really means and how it can surprise us in the most unexpected ways. I could see my father stiffen slightly at the oblique reference to his words, but I continued with grace rather than malice. Success isn't always what we expect it to look like. Sometimes it emerges from unconventional paths. Sometimes it comes from pursuing dreams that others consider impractical. And sometimes it requires us to trust our own vision even when those closest to us cannot see it. As I spoke about my research journey, the challenges of developing revolutionary technology, and the satisfaction of seeing that work translate into real benefits for cancer patients, I watched my family absorbing the magnitude of what I had accomplished. The theoretical work they had dismissed was being celebrated by the most prestigious university in the world. The impractical research they had questioned was being recognized as life-saving medical innovation. The Elena Mitchell Center for Advanced Drug Delivery represents more than just recognition of past achievements, I continued. It represents Harvard's commitment to supporting research that can transform human health. The work that will be conducted in this facility will build upon the foundation we have established, pushing the boundaries of what's possible in targeted therapy and personalized medicine. The final moment of the ceremony brought the revelation that would forever change how my family understood my place in the scientific world. Dr. Harrison returned to the podium to announce a development that even I had not expected. "Before we conclude today's ceremony," he said, his voice carrying the gravity of a historic announcement, "I have one additional piece of news that speaks to the extraordinary nature of Dr. Mitchell's contributions to medical science. The MacArthur Foundation has selected Elena as one of this year's MacArthur Fellows, recognizing her as a genius whose work shows exceptional creativity and potential for significant contributions to society. The MacArthur Genius Grant, the recognition that even Nobel laureates consider the pinnacle of scientific achievement. The audience erupted in applause, but I was focused entirely on my family's reaction. My father's face had gone completely pale, his mouth slightly open in an expression of absolute shock. My mother was staring at me with tears in her eyes, finally understanding that her daughter had achieved something beyond her wildest comprehension. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, my family approached me slowly, uncertainty written across their faces. For perhaps the first time in my life, they seemed genuinely at a loss for words when confronted with my achievements. "Elena," my father began, his voice lacking its usual authority. "I had no idea. I mean, I knew you were doing research, but this." He gestured helplessly at the banner overhead displaying my name. "Harvard naming a building after you. The MacArthur Fellowship. This is extraordinary." The moment I had imagined for years was finally here, but it felt different than I had expected. Instead of triumphant vindication, I felt a quiet satisfaction mixed with genuine sadness for the years of support and encouragement I had missed. "Yes, Dad," I said simply. "It appears success didn't skip our generation after all." The reception following the dedication ceremony provided the perfect backdrop for the full transformation of my family's understanding. As we moved through the elegant gathering in Harvard's faculty club, my parents witnessed firsthand the respect and admiration I commanded in the scientific community. Department heads approached me to discuss collaboration opportunities, pharmaceutical executives sought my input on future research directions, and government officials praised my work's potential impact on public health policy. Dr. Jennifer Harrison, who had become not just my mentor but a cherished friend, made a point of speaking with my parents directly. "You must be incredibly proud of Elena," she told them with genuine warmth. "In my 25 years at Harvard, I have never worked with a scientist who combines such brilliant innovation with exceptional character. She has the rare ability to pursue groundbreaking research while never losing sight of the human impact of her work." I watched my mother's face as Dr. Harrison described specific examples of my research breakthroughs, the clinical trials that were saving lives, and the international recognition my work had earned. Each detail seemed to deepen her understanding of how significantly she had underestimated her own daughter's capabilities and achievements. My father, meanwhile, found himself in conversation with Dr. Michael Harrison, Harvard's president, who had no idea about our family dynamics, but spoke enthusiastically about my contributions to the university. "Dr. Mitchell represents everything we hope for in Harvard researchers," he explained. "Brilliant scientific mind, innovative thinking, and the kind of leadership that inspires entire teams to achieve extraordinary results. We're honored to have her on our faculty." The contrast between this conversation and the dinner table discussions of my childhood was stark. Here, my intellectual achievements were being celebrated as exceptional, rather than dismissed as impractical. My research was being recognized as world-changing rather than theoretical. The daughter they had written off as academically gifted but ultimately limited was being praised by some of the most accomplished people in science. David, to his credit, seemed genuinely awed by the revelations about my career. During a quiet moment, he pulled me aside with an expression of newfound respect. "Elena, I owe you an apology," he said, his voice carrying unusual humility. "I've been so focused on my own medical training that I never really understood what you were accomplishing. This is incredible. You're literally changing how doctors treat cancer. I had no idea my sister was doing work at this level." His acknowledgement meant more than I had expected. While David had always been the favored child, he had never been actively cruel, merely the unwitting beneficiary of our parents' misguided priorities. "Thank you," I replied. "I think we all got so caught up in different definitions of medical success that we lost sight of the bigger picture." As the evening progressed, I noticed my parents becoming increasingly quiet, their usual confident social demeanor replaced by something approaching embarrassment. They were beginning to realize that their dismissal of my career hadn't just been wrong, it had been spectacularly, publicly wrong. Every conversation they overheard about my research, every compliment directed my way, every sign of the respect I commanded in this community served to highlight the magnitude of their misjudgment. The most poignant moment came when Dr. Williams approached our family group with a copy of that morning's Boston Globe, which featured a front-page story about the building dedication. The headline read, "Harvard names building for cancer research pioneer," accompanied by a large photograph of me standing beside a model of the future research center. "I thought you might like to have this," Dr. Williams told my parents with a warm smile. Elena's work is being recognized nationally as one of the most significant medical breakthroughs of the decade. You must be so proud to have raised such an exceptional daughter. My mother accepted the newspaper with trembling hands, staring at the photograph as if seeing me for the first time. The image showed me in my professional setting, surrounded by the advanced equipment and research materials that had become my daily environment. I looked confident, accomplished, and completely at home in a world they had never imagined I could inhabit. Later that evening, after the last guests had departed and the formal celebrations had concluded, my family and I found ourselves in a quiet corner of the Harvard Faculty Club. The awkward silence that had characterized so many of our interactions over the years felt different now, heavier with unspoken acknowledgments and realizations. My father was the first to break the silence. "Elena," he began, his voice carrying a tone I had never heard before, "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you recognition that I have been fundamentally wrong about your capabilities, your potential, and your achievements. What I witnessed today, the respect you command, the significance of your work, the impact you're having on medical science, it's beyond anything I imagined possible." He paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. When I said that success might skip our generation, I was speaking from my own limitations, my own narrow understanding of what achievement looks like. I failed to see the extraordinary scientist my daughter was becoming, and in doing so, I failed as a father. My mother, tears flowing freely now, reached for my hand. "Elena, I don't know how to apologize for years of not seeing you, not celebrating you, not recognizing that we had raised someone truly exceptional. Watching you today, seeing how these brilliant people speak about you and your work, I finally understand that we've been living with a genius and treating her like she was ordinary." The apologies, while meaningful, felt almost secondary to the broader transformation I was witnessing. My parents weren't just acknowledging past mistakes. They were grappling with a complete revision of their understanding of who I was and what I had accomplished. The daughter they had seen as academically capable but fundamentally limited was being revealed as someone who had surpassed not only their expectations, but their capacity to even imagine such achievement. "There's something else you should know," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "This recognition, this success, it didn't happen despite your lack of support. In many ways, it happened because of it. Your doubt, your dismissal, your certainty that I wasn't capable of extraordinary things, it all became fuel for me to work harder, think more creatively, and push beyond what even I thought was possible." I looked at each of them in turn, seeing the pain in their faces as they absorbed the implications of my words. "I'm not saying this to hurt you, but because I want you to understand something important. Your assessment of my potential says nothing about my actual capabilities. It only reflects the limitations of your own vision." The conversation that followed was unlike any we had ever had as a family. For the first time, my parents asked genuine questions about my work, my research methodology, my future plans. They listened with the attention they had always reserved for David's medical school updates, but now they were trying to understand research that was far more complex and groundbreaking than anything in traditional medical practice. David, showing a maturity I hadn't previously recognized, added his own perspective. "Elena, I think I owe you an apology too. I've benefited from Mom and Dad's favoritism my entire life without questioning whether it was fair or accurate. Seeing what you've accomplished, and accomplished completely on your own, makes me realize how much support and encouragement you deserved that you never received." Over the following weeks, the media attention surrounding the building dedication continued to grow. Major news networks ran features on my research, scientific journals published profiles of my work, and patient advocacy organizations highlighted how my technology was transforming cancer treatment. Each story included details about my journey from promising graduate student to world-renowned researcher, painting a picture of achievement that made my family's previous dismissal seem even more glaring. The most meaningful recognition, however, came from an unexpected source. 3 months after the ceremony, I received a handwritten letter from a woman named Sarah Chen, a 34-year-old mother who had been one of the first patients to receive my nanoparticle therapy during the clinical trials. Dr. Mitchell, her letter began, I don't know if you remember me, but I was patient 23 in your phase 2 trial. When I was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer, my oncologist told me I had perhaps 6 months to live with traditional chemotherapy, and even that would come with devastating side effects that might make my final months unbearable. And she went on to describe how my targeted therapy had not only eliminated her cancer without the brutal side effects of conventional treatment, but had allowed her to maintain her quality of life throughout the process. I just celebrated my daughter's 5th birthday, a celebration I never thought I would see. Because of your research, I'm not just alive, I'm thriving. You didn't just save my life. You saved my family's future. I shared Sarah's letter with my parents during one of our new monthly dinners, a tradition we had established as we worked to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than conditional approval. My mother read the letter with tears in her eyes, finally understanding that my theoretical work had translated into the most practical impact possible, saving lives and preserving families. This is what real medical achievement looks like, my father said quietly, after reading Sarah's letter. Not just academic recognition or professional advancement, but actual human lives saved and suffering prevented. Elena, you've accomplished something I never came close to in my entire medical career. The transformation in our family dynamics was profound but gradual. My parents began asking for copies of my published papers, attending virtual presentations of my research, and genuinely trying to understand the scientific principles behind my work. They started introducing me to their friends not as Elena, she's doing research, but as our daughter Elena, the scientist who's revolutionizing cancer treatment. 6 months after the building dedication, I received an invitation that represented the pinnacle of scientific recognition. The Nobel Committee was considering my work for the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. While the selection process would take months and the outcome was uncertain, the mere consideration was acknowledgement that my research had achieved the highest levels of scientific significance. When I shared this news with my family, the reaction was everything I had once dreamed of receiving for my earlier achievements. My mother called everyone she knew to share the news. My father researched previous Nobel laureates to understand the magnitude of the recognition, and David sent me a card expressing his pride in having a sister whose work was being considered for the world's most prestigious scientific award. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came during a quiet conversation with my father as we walked through Harvard Yard one afternoon. We were visiting the construction site of the Elena Mitchell Center, watching as the building that would bear my name took shape. I keep thinking about that dinner conversation, he said, his voice thoughtful and regretful. When I said success might skip our generation, I was really expressing my own fears about mediocrity, my own disappointment that I hadn't achieved more in my medical career. I projected those limitations onto you instead of recognizing that you were already surpassing anything I had ever accomplished. He stopped walking and turned to face me directly. Elena, I want you to know that watching you receive the recognition you deserve has been one of the most important learning experiences of my life. You've taught me that true achievement often comes from paths we don't expect, from people willing to pursue their vision even when others can't see it. A year after the building dedication, the Elena Mitchell Center for Advanced Drug Delivery opened its doors. The state-of-the-art facility housed laboratories equipped with technology that would have been science fiction just a decade earlier. Teams of researchers from around the world had joined my program, drawn by the opportunity to work on the cutting edge of medical innovation. The opening ceremony was smaller than the dedication had been, but more personal. This time, my parents didn't attend as confused observers trying to understand their daughter's achievements. They came as proud supporters who had educated themselves about my work and could speak knowledgeably about the research being conducted in the building that bore my name. During my remarks at the opening ceremony, I spoke about the journey that had brought us to this moment. This center represents more than just advanced research facilities, I said, looking out at the audience that included patients whose lives had been saved by our treatments, colleagues who had supported my work, and family members who had learned to see me clearly. It represents the power of persistence, the importance of believing in your own vision even when others cannot see it, and the incredible things that become possible when we refuse to let other people's limitations define our potential. As I concluded my remarks, I noticed my father in the audience, tears streaming down his face as he applauded. Later, he would tell me that in that moment, he finally understood that success hadn't skipped our generation. It had simply taken a form he had been too limited to recognize. The Nobel Prize announcement came on a crisp October morning, almost exactly 2 years after the building dedication ceremony. I was in my laboratory when my assistant rushed in with the news that the Nobel Committee was calling. The conversation was brief and formal, but the message was clear. I had been awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for my work in developing targeted cancer therapy systems. The news broke globally within hours, with headlines celebrating not just the scientific achievement, but the story of a researcher who had revolutionized medical treatment while still in her early 30s. The girl whose father had suggested success might skip their generation had become the youngest woman ever to receive the Nobel Prize in medicine. My parents' reaction to the Nobel Prize announcement was everything I had once desperately wanted their response to my Harvard acceptance to be. They were overwhelmed with pride, genuinely excited to share the news, and finally able to articulate why my achievements were extraordinary. The recognition they offered now was based on true understanding rather than obligated family support. During the Nobel Prize ceremony in Stockholm, as I delivered my acceptance speech to the assembled dignitaries and fellow laureates, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The theoretical work that had been dismissed as impractical was being honored as one of the most significant medical breakthroughs of the century. The research path my family had questioned was being celebrated by the international scientific community. But the most meaningful moment came after the formal ceremony, during the private celebration with family and friends. My father approached me with a small wrapped package, his hand shaking slightly as he handed it to me. "Elena," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I want to give you something that belonged to my father, your grandfather. He was a man who believed that every generation could surpass the previous one, that success builds upon itself rather than skipping around randomly." Inside the package was my grandfather's pocket watch, engraved with words I had never seen before. "For my descendants who will exceed my dreams." My father explained that his own father had given him the watch with instructions to pass it to the child who achieved the most extraordinary success. "I almost gave this to David when he graduated medical school," my father admitted. "But I realize now that I never understood what extraordinary success really looked like. Your grandfather would be amazed to know that his granddaughter won the Nobel Prize for research that will save countless lives. This watch belongs with you." As I held my grandfather's watch, feeling the weight of family history and future possibility, I realized that my journey had come full circle. The success my father had assumed would skip our generation had not only arrived, but had exceeded anything our family had ever imagined possible. Have you ever had to prove your worth to people who should have believed in you from the beginning? Sometimes the greatest victory isn't just achieving success, but helping others expand their understanding of what success can look like. Share your own stories of overcoming family doubt in the comments below, and remember, your potential is never limited by other people's ability to see it. Thank you for joining me on this journey of vindication and discovery. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more tales of turning family rejection into extraordinary achievement. Sometimes the people who doubt you most become witnesses to your greatest triumphs.